Thanks so much for joining us right here on the CBN News Channel. I'm Ephraim Graham.
And I'm Charlene Israel. Egypt enters its fourth day of massive protests against President Mohamed Morsi. 23 people died in clashes overnight. With the clock ticking on the military's deadline to intervene in the crisis, Morsi is still refusing to step down. Here's Chris Mitchell from Jerusalem.
Morsi told Egyptians he won't step down because he wants to protect the revolution.
How can we protect a revolution from being stolen? I'll tell you. The revolution of the 25th of January and its goals, protecting its legitimacy. The price for this is my life because I want to protect your lives.
Morsi also demanded the army withdraw their ultimatum.
No one has the authority to intervene in the Constitution, either by what they say or by force.
Morsi's reaction angered many in the streets.
He didn't respect anyone who's here and in other squares. He came out with a speech to provoke us, not to calm us. He is threatening us, but I'm sending him a message from here. Egyptians will never be scared.
Many vowed to stay.
The president was targeting his followers and his Muslim Brotherhood in his speech. He is ruling in their favor, and he does not consider the rest of the people. We'll remain in the square unless he steps down.
Yet at this pro-Morsi demonstration, some chanted they would defend Islam with their blood. Morsi's decision sets the stage for a major confrontation between his supporters and those who want him to resign. Already more than 20 have died and more than 200 injured in fighting between the two opposing groups.
We will protest here until we achieve a solution, and we want the president to do something to prevent any bloodshed which could happen. God willing, he should step down.
The army announced it will go ahead with its roadmap when its deadline expires. Without a political solution, Egypt remains a country divided, and many fear on the verge of a civil war. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
A major component of the president's healthcare overhaul is being delayed until 2015. The administration announced Tuesday large companies do not have to implement the law on January 1st, 2014. Business leaders are breathing a sigh of relief, saying the delay will give companies more time to update their healthcare coverage before facing arbitrary fines. The law says companies with more than 50 workers must provide coverage to all full-time employees or face a series of tax penalties. Pro-business groups complain that bureaucrats fill the provision with too many complicated requirements.
For example, there is the employer mandate, the requirement that businesses with 50 or more full-time equivalent employees provide health insurance or pay penalties. That was a 3.5-page provision that got turned into a 144-page regulation with 44 definitions.
Republicans say the delay just proves the law is unworkable and should be replaced with simpler reforms. The delay is expected to help Democrats in the 2014 elections by muting a GOP line of attack.
Christian leaders are pushing for guaranteed exemptions from Obamacare's birth control coverage mandate. Catholic and Protestant representatives wrote an open letter to all Americans. They called on the government to exempt any organization or individual that has religious or moral objections. Reverend Russell Moore with the Southern Baptists called the current exemptions word games and accounting tricks. He said, as we approach Independence Day, we are reminded of how important freedom of conscience is to all Americans.
A new report shows the sequester budget cuts did not hurt the nation after all. President Obama had issued dire warnings about a terrible impact. He had claimed, among other things, that the Pentagon would not be able to pay for health care for service members and that 600,000 low-income families would lose food aid. But the predictions did not come true. In fact, the Washington Post reports that most agencies made do. For example, the Justice Department cut $300 million from already expired expenses. It also cut $45 million that was allocated for detainees who don't exist. And the U.S. Geological Survey slashed nearly $3 million in conference expenses. Joining us now with more is Bill Frezza, a Boston-based venture capitalist and a fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Well, Bill, $85 billion did sound like a lot of money, so how come it didn't hurt the economy?
Well, the Sequester Theater was a show that bombed on opening day. There was this huge buildup that the press leaned right into describing all sorts of horribles that were going to befall the American people. None of it happened. There was a little bit of a kerfuffle at the TSA, but it was really an effort, a PR effort that failed, and it's going to continue to fail through the fall.
The federal budget is massive, so how much more could be cut without hurting the country?
Well, let's remember that these are not really cuts. These are reductions in the rate of growth, and I do wish the media would stop calling them cuts. We've got a federal budget that's growing without bound, and the real tragedy of it is that the meat of the budget, the entitlement programs, aren't even on the table for discussion. We're just nibbling at the edges here. We've got a Congress now that's completely dysfunctional, with both parties locked in a permanent campaign, and a president who's not leading. And so this kind of gridlock is going to continue.
Americans have been tightening their belts for years. Shouldn't Washington be doing or living by the same standard?
Washington will never live by the same standards the rest of the country lives. Just look at how the economy is booming in Washington while the rest of the country is suffering. We've got swollen capital syndrome. We've got entitled congressmen who are there for life thanks to gerrymandered districts and so few competitive races. And so we have got to learn to live with a permanently dysfunctional government.
Fans of big government said the sequester would hurt America, but you wrote recently on Forbes.com that something else will cause a dramatic downshift for companies and employees. What is it?
Well, Obamacare is about to kick in, and one of the big problems with Obamacare is that there are thresholds set in the program, both in the number of hours worked per week and the number of employees that a company can hold before being hit with Obamacare penalties. You're going to see a reshuffling of small companies to avoid those thresholds, and we're going to end up with the same kind of problems that we're seeing in Italy with frozen labor markets and very, very little growth from what should be the healthy part of the entrepreneurial economy.
The Competitive Enterprise Institute has released its 10,000 commandments exposing overregulation in America. What is the top highlight?
The problem right now is the EPA. We've got Obama declaring war on energy, and this is going to have a huge impact on the economy. It's going to affect jobs. It's going to affect growth. Declaring carbon dioxide a pollutant is a major, major shift, and having this happen without any legislative authority is a big regulatory problem.
All right, Bill Frez with the Competitive Enterprise Institute, thank you for your time.
Fire investigators from across the country are in Prescott, Arizona, trying to determine what caused the nation's largest loss of firefighters since 9/11. Meanwhile, thousands gathered for a vigil Tuesday night. That vigil included 21-year-old Brendan McDonough, the sole survivor of the 20-person crew of elite firefighters. McDonough was acting as a lookout when the winds suddenly shifted and the fire raced out of control Sunday.
He's trying to deal with the same things that we're all trying to deal with, but you can understand how that's compounded being there on the scene. He was warning them to get out. They had made their plan to get out. They were attempting to reach their safety zone.
There are still nearly 600 firefighters on the front lines of the blaze that has scorched more than 13 square miles and destroyed 200 homes.
The Texas abortion showdown is ramping up again. Color-coordinated protesters gathered Tuesday outside the state capitol building, blue for pro-life and orange for pro-choice. Inside, thousands of people waited, ready to share their opinion. Debate over Texas's attempt to change its abortion law ran well into the night. More than 2,000 citizens signed up to speak, but fewer than 300 were actually able to do so before the midnight deadline.
As a fifth-generation Texan,
your political effort to mobilize.
She gave me a lot of advice that I wasn't looking for.
The initial House bill failed after Democrat Senator Wendy Davis filibustered for nearly 10 hours, and then unruly protesters continued to run out the clock.
But I don't believe that you take that filibuster and coordinate it with the mob.
Governor Rick Perry called a special session so lawmakers could take up the measure again. If it passes, the bill would ban most abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy, citing the belief that unborn babies can feel pain by that stage. The measure would also require abortion clinics and abortion doctors to comply with the same standards as the rest of the medical field.
It supports safety, the health and safety of a woman who does choose to have an abortion. We're just asking that the facilities come up to the same standards as any other outpatient facility.
Critics say the bill would shut down most of the abortion clinics in Texas.
We think it's bad for the state of Texas to be waging this kind of fight against the women of this state. but we will fight it.
Still, others say the mood this time around is much more civil.
It's really good to see citizen input from all segments of Texas, as far as I can tell, and both sides represented.
It's been very, very cordial. Everyone has been very respectful. You know, if we've had conversations with people who we oppose, it's very nice, calm conversations.
Tuesday's hearing was meant to take note of public testimony. At the end of the night, the bill cleared the committee with an 8-3 vote. And the full Texas State House will vote on that bill next week.
A gay divorce case in Indiana could undermine that state's marriage laws. Donald Schultz Lee is seeking a divorce from his husband. The men were married in 2009 in Massachusetts, where same-sex marriage is legal. But Massachusetts will not accept their divorce petition because they are no longer residents there. So Schultz's attorney filed the petition in Indianapolis. Indiana law defines marriage as a union between a man and a woman. This case could test that law.
Of course, the Supreme Court decision last week is going to create some situations, I think, all around the state of Indiana that many of us are not used to handling.
If we're successful, my client gets a divorce, which is what he's seeking. If that makes new law, then that makes new law. Our federal government is certainly heading in a different direction, and that may lead eventually to mandating that the states head in a different direction also.
Some attorneys predict that same-sex divorce may become legal in states like Indiana, even if same-sex marriage remains illegal.
Michigan's public employers may now choose to offer benefits to same-sex domestic partners. 5 gay couples sued the state regarding government employee benefits. A federal judge, citing last week's Supreme Court ruling on gay marriage, struck down a Michigan law barring public employers from extending benefits to same-sex spouses. Michigan's Constitution defines marriage as between a man and a woman.
2 HIV-positive patients who received bone marrow transplants for cancer now show no signs of the deadly virus. Researchers at Harvard University announced last year that 8 months after receiving healthy donor cells, the virus had not reappeared in the patient's blood. However, they were still on antiretroviral drugs at the time. Today, they announced that the patients are still HIV-free, even though they've stopped taking those drugs.
Coming up, The Lone Ranger and Despicable Me 2 hit the theaters. We've got family-friendly movie reviews for your holiday weekend.
Hello? Is this thing on? Hey, kids, do you love games? And do you love discovering things? Well, do ya?
Then you're gonna love this. It's the new free Superbook Kids Bible app. You can play games, watch videos, find answers to your questions, and a whole lot more. The new Superbook Kids Bible app. Free downloads available on iTunes now.
2 big films with family-friendly potential hit theaters today. Here with more is Bob Waliszewski, Director of Focus on the Family's Entertainment Review Department called Plugged In Online. Bob, we've got Disney's The Lone Ranger coming out. What'd you think?
Dun, 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 dun. I just got done watching 4 episodes of the original, by the way, that came out in 1949 through 1957 and then kept airing. Really, I think if our viewers are wanting to watch The Lone Ranger, they may want to go back and do like I did and watch some of the originals on Hulu. Not to say that this version, Disney's version, doesn't have some good messages. The Lone Ranger and Tonto here are still about justice, are still on the right side of the law, if you will. But Johnny Depp's Tonto is quite neurotic, but more from a family perspective. This Tonto, we find out, is involved in visiting prostitutes. Prostitution is winked at here. In this film, Christianity is silly and ineffective. Obviously, a big concern for me and most of our viewers. This one, surprisingly, is quite bloody. Needless to say, the movie has some fun moments, some positive themes, mixed bag, but there's quite a bit of reworking, retooling that comes out on the non-family side of the equation.
Well, how about Despicable Me 2? Is it as good as the first one?
It is. I like this one. A little bit about the film. Gru, if you remember Gru from the first one, he's the individual who wanted to be the supervillain of all supervillains, but ended up having a soft spot in his heart for 3 orphan girls and becomes an adoptive father. Well, he's still about being an adoptive father, so fatherhood is still a major theme in this film. This time around, there's an anonymous bad guy that has the ability to turn people and creatures into evil, blue, monstrous versions of themselves. And he's called up by the Anti-Villain League to see if he can hunt out this bad guy. Cute little film, has some great messages, as I said. I gave it a 4 out of 5 for family friendliness. Knocked it down for a little toilet humor, a little lying that has no consequences that I think families will probably want to talk through. Skinny dipping is winked at in this film, as is drinking champagne by one of Gru's minions, but nothing's a deal breaker here. I think this one on this 4th of July weekend might get us out of the hot summer heat and might be worth an air-conditioned theater visit with our kids.
All right, good advice. Thank you, Bob.
You bet. We'll talk to you soon.
Up next, seeking solutions to Ukraine's orphan epidemic, how Christians are taking dramatic action to see every orphan in the country adopted by a family.
They're unknown and seemingly unwanted and unloved. Millions of children worldwide living without parents.
Now, churches, Christian organizations, and hundreds of families in one Eastern European nation are working to make a difference in the lives of the most vulnerable. George Thomas has more from Kiev, Ukraine.
To the human mind, it seems almost impossible. But spend time with the Isaiah family, and they'll soon convince you that with God, all things are possible.
The moment you see an orphan's eyes, I promise it will change your life.
10 years ago, Svetlana lived with a dark past. Yevgeny was a drug addict and HIV positive. Both had a radical encounter with Jesus Christ that changed their lives forever.
I began to search for God. I could see the path that I needed to go on.
The couple's dream, to see their nation of Ukraine without orphans.
If someone told me 10 years ago I would have these many children and would be married to an HIV positive man, I would say that's humanly impossible. But God birthed in us something special.
Svetlana and Yevgeny became the first family in Ukraine to adopt a child with HIV. Not just one, 7 HIV-positive children.
If we want to see a Ukraine without orphans, Christians have to be a part of the solution.
And Christians are answering the call. Svetlana joined hundreds of pastors and Christian leaders from different parts of the globe in Kyiv recently for a summit on orphan care. Organizer Ruslan Maluta leads a grassroots movement committed to care for Ukraine's orphans.
God said that He is the father of the fatherless, which means that He wants every orphan to be in a family. How is God going to do it? It's through the church. Adoption and providing a home for an orphan is an integral part of the gospel.
And this is a crowd that is very serious about seeing a Ukraine without orphans. Sitting in the crowd, there are about 160 families that have either adopted a Ukrainian child or are today foster parents. Gennady Munenko is one of them. He's a pastor, and along with his wife, they have 31 foster children.
Should all families take 31 children in like we did? No. But if this movement is to have a lasting impact, Christian leaders must set the example, and they are. The last few years, God has been moving on the hearts of pastors to lead the charge.
Paul Pennington is very encouraged by what he sees happening in Ukraine.
The potential here is huge because the church is engaged across denominational lines to be really a model to countries around the world how the church can make a difference for children.
Pennington is with Hope for Orphans, a Texas group helping Ukrainian churches with Bible-based orphan ministries. Pennington has 6 children, 5 of whom are adopted.
The only way to reach 140 million orphans around the world is through the church, because only the church is big enough Only the church has the power and the mandate to reach that many children in a sustained way.
Pastors in Russia, Belarus, Romania, and Moldova have started similar Nation Without Orphans movements.
What an honor to be in a
West Stafford president of Compassion International says he's moved by the pastors' dedication to the vision.
They do it with an understanding that God commits to bless orphans and those who do bless orphans. To see an audacious vision that these guys actually are qualified to talk about because they're doing it.
Steve Weber calls the movement a miracle. Weber leads CBN's Ukraine office, which has an active Orphans Promise outreach.
20 years ago, there was such a stigma against the orphan that Christians would fake pregnancy by carrying a pillow before they would take an orphan. Today, we're preaching, take the orphans home in our churches.
And the public is taking note. At a nationally televised event that drew Ukraine's rich and famous, Svetlana and Yevgeny received hero status and honored with the Pride of the Nation Award for their heart for orphans. There was hardly a dry eye in the crowd as people stood and applauded.
We didn't think about any awards. We simply were doing what was on our hearts to do.
We have only God to thank. He shows us how to love the unlovable. Without Him, we have no life. Without Him, my children have no hope. Without Him, the orphans of Ukraine have no hope.
George Thomas, CBN News, Kyiv, Ukraine.
Finally today, CBN International shows the love of God around the world in many ways.
Yeah, one of those ways, distributing more than 11,000 wheelchairs since 2005. Recently, 518 chairs were distributed by CBN Indonesia. The aim of the project is to provide mobility to physically disabled and to improve their quality of life. CBN's health and medical outreach in Indonesia treats an average of 14,000 people every month.
The gospel plus good works.
I tell you, hard at work.
That God may be glorified.
Yes, indeed.
Amen. Well, that's going to do it now for the CBN News Channel. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com.
And tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. See you tomorrow.
Introducing the CBN Bible from CBN.com. Now, an easier way to study the Bible and grow in your faith. Highlight your favorite verse. Read separate versions at a glance. Click and read a commentary. Or cross-reference your favorite verse using the Strong's Concordance. All the right tools to study the Bible, all in one place. The CBN Bible, available at cbn.com/Bible or the iTunes App Store.